So glad to see you in large numbers here. This is the third lecture of the series Introduction to Science Education. We have today with us Sadhna Saxena, who was a faculty member at the Delhi University College of Education. Sadhna is, if you go really back in, well, I don't want to use the word history, but if you go back in the years, she's trained as a physicist. She has a MSc degree in physics. But by the time, as she said this morning, she initially thought she knew she liked physics. And by the time she finished her MSc, she found that, well, there was something else that was more interesting. And she took the plunge into science education at a very early stage, barely finishing her MSc in physics, 6 months before that actually. And she went to a place called Hoshangabad, which you might have heard of, and started working in what was then a sort of loose organization of people who wanted to improve generally the education levels in rural India, which then, as years progressed, it morphed into a science teaching program called the Hoshangabad Science Teaching Programme. She was associated with this program for a very long time, after which she then worked for some organizations related to literacy, and finally did a PhD in science education and became a faculty member at Delhi University in late 90s or maybe even the early 2000s. So she retired a couple of years ago from the university. She was also the head of the department for some time. And her work has mostly been in the area of what curricula should be. This is what she's going to talk to us about. She's going to talk to us about what a good textbook should be. Okay. This is, I think, something that is always close to us in the academia. We always struggle with what is the best textbook for X or Y or Z, and each one of us has a favorite. Okay. You take any course, and each one of us has a favorite. And some of us can give reasons for why we like it. Some of us can't, but we still, clutch to it. But at the school level, things are a little different. At the school level, the learners really don't have much choice. There's a prescribed textbook. And because there is a prescribed textbook, the demands on the textbook are enormous. They have to meet multiple purposes. And this is really a challenge. I mean, the design of a textbook is a very challenging process. Sadhana will tell us a little about this and also tell us about what her views are on this matter and some perhaps about a little about the work that she has done in this direction. So Sadhana, welcome to ICER and welcome to this talk. And this, as she has pointed out, she wants this, very much would like this to be an interactive talk. And despite difficulties, they both, Kamal and Sadhna, wanted to come here in person so that they could interact with you. And this will really be a freewheeling talk. You can make it as interactive as long as you want. Okay. So we'll need this. Because on the streaming,
okay, so I have to carry this.
No, you want to sit or?
Yeah, I want to sit.
So please sit and
getting used to this technology.
Yes, please do that. And just keep this here. Okay. Yeah, then you can either hang it or you can not, or just leave it on the desk if that.
Let's put it down.
Listen, I'll just clip this to the band so that it doesn't.
Is it okay? Yeah. I'm audible? Hello, everybody, and thank you. I think ICER faculty people, especially this group, which is setting up this new department in ICER, for giving me this opportunity. And I must say that this is after 2 years, I'm having this offline interaction, class, lecture, whatever you may call it. So it's a new beginning for me as well, after a long time, and I may take little time to get reused to this. Otherwise, earlier, there was not a. In fact, one took time to get used to the Zoom classes. So now it's again coming back to that. That had become the new normal, and one is trying to get back to the normal thing. Science textbooks, I think I'll speak for 20 to 25 minutes, maybe, I don't know, I have not assessed, maybe a little more. As Bhas has said that I would like this to be an interactive session, more questions would help me in digging deeper into the whole issue. There's so much in my head that it was very difficult for me to plan a lecture. I mean, I could have planned 3-4 lectures, but planning one lecture was a little tough for me. Lots of things were coming to my mind all the time. In my abstract, I had highlighted 3 questions. One related to history of changing the textbooks along with the changes in curriculum, and what actually informed these changes, educational concerns, societal concerns, and many other things probably. So if we look at the history of development of science textbooks, last 70 years of history, so there are multiple things, including scientific concern, including this concern that despite these changes, students are not learning science. But for the time being, I am not focusing on that. If you are interested, we can have, after what I have to say, I have said, then you can ask question if you are interested in that. And the second question which I have written in the abstract is about developmental psychology. What is its relationship with textbooks? How does the knowledge of developmental psychology informs textbook writing? So that also I am not going to focus right now, but we can have a discussion if required. And all of this is about school science textbooks. What I am going to focus on is the relationship of pedagogy and textbook, method of teaching of science and textbook. The question is if the science textbook, the way it's written, the content, does that decide the pedagogy? Okay. I mean, we are not talking about very creative, very enterprising teacher. We are talking about ordinary teacher who uses textbooks. So, the content of the textbook, how does it impact the classroom teaching methodology? What is the relationship between the two? This is what I am going to discuss. But before getting into this, I also want to underline that when it comes to textbooks, we have in India, a major concern which drives what the textbooks are in general and science textbooks also. The concern is that most of our students, government school students, they go to government schools, although the percentage is changing, but even if they don't go to government schools, they go to students, they go to very ordinary private schools. They don't have access to any other books except for textbooks. So that has been a major concern for people who have been involved in the writing of textbooks, and that and they don't have supplementary reading material, they don't have access to other resources to obtain knowledge of science. So these concerns have also in some way affected the content of textbooks in general, science textbooks in particular. And so what has happened over the years, that the textbooks are have become information centric. This concern leads to stuffing textbooks with lot of information, with little concern about how teaching would be done through these kinds of textbooks. So, for example, I think in 1980s, 1990, actually when some of us started working in science education, mid 1975, mid 70s, the whole focus was on including lot of information, and that was called upgradation of textbooks. And the argument was that knowledge of science is increasing at an exponential rate, and we can't have backward textbooks. We need to have a lot of this information included in textbooks. As a result of that, the textbooks became incomprehensible, unreadable. In fact, there was a time when we used to carry some of these textbooks in meetings, and we used to read out portions from that and ask the audience if they have been able to understand anything, and garbled information which even teachers either didn't understand or they didn't admit that they didn't understand, and it ended up rote learning, reinforcing rote learning without either the teacher or the students understanding what science is all about. I would say that since then things have improved. Even NCERT books are much better, much better. Especially in last 15 years or so, the NCERT books which have been produced up to class 12 level, they are much better than what they were. And people who worked in Hoshangabad Science Teaching Programme, many of those people, physicists and biologists, are involved in making of those books. And they're comprehensible, they're readable, there is a lot of attention being paid to the kind of language which is used, the kind of content which is there, and as NCERT in its own position paper writes about cognitive validity, and also there are two terms, content validity. Cognitive validity meaning it's according to the age related issues, at what level what concepts should be taught, and content validity basically meaning that content is accurate, presented in right manner, it's not that garbled information is produced. So all these things have been taken care of. There is no doubt about that in new NCERT books. Production is much better, the illustrations are better, colorful. In fact, many of my students, when they compare the textbooks, they say that one of the things which they really like about NCERT books, and this has been told to me by almost all the students who have looked at NCERT books, that illustrations are colorful and they are very attractive. If we talk about class 6, 7, 8 books, so that is what is something which attracts. So in that sense, NCERT books have improved a lot. In last 10 to 15 years, they look different. However, I think that temptation for including a lot of information, this with science, this is the only reading material which they have access to. So it's important that they should know this, also this kind of temptation I still see in NCERT textbooks, and teacher remains the authority in such a situation. So, what is the option which a teacher has with this kind of information loaded textbooks? What can a teacher, even a enterprising well meaning teacher, do using such textbooks? Mostly the only option is that to use didactic method, that is lecture method, that is reading from the book and then maybe stopping at some point, explaining some point, but that is teacher's decision that this point is, maybe this point will be difficult for students to understand, so let me elaborate on this. So, it is teacher centric to that extent. I mean, NCERT may not like to agree with this, because their understanding is that they are making textbooks student centric, including activities, including a process of interaction by asking questions to students. All of that is there, yet it does reflect this anxiety that by the time they finish this class they should know so much. And so there is another thing which I have heard my students talking about, my Department of Education students, when they used to the science students used to go for their practice classes to schools. They used to say that, and they were supposed to observe science teachers, that is one of the important aspect of practice teaching. So, they used to come back and tell me that well, these books are much better, but as far as pedagogy is concerned, as far as method of teaching is concerned, there has not been much change, and teacher still is the center, where teacher is either giving a lecture or teacher is clearing doubts. This is another very interesting thing. Students seek some clarification, if they do at all, and the teacher clarifies, immediately teacher, this is the right answer. Okay, so you have not understood this, so this is the right answer. There is nothing in between, so this is one thing, and then again, sir, I have, madam, I have this doubt. Okay, so teacher's job is to clear that doubt. So this is in some of the best schools. In other schools, it was like teacher reading to the whole class, and the understanding is that the work is done. Of course, there are activities which are there, but there are two very important things which we need to keep in mind. Activities are followed by answers. It is not that the activities are there to search for answers. You won't get answers without doing the activity. It is not that. The answers is there. So, you do this, and you will see this. So, this is something very important, that one, the question is whether the activities which are there are doable or not in classroom situation, or even otherwise in field situation. And two, the activities, if the answer is already there, then what is the fun in doing the activity, because the whole focus would be in getting that answer even if you are doing an activity. So, to that extent it is not open ended. It is not that a different answer, a student will have confidence even if he or she gets a different answer, different from what is written in the book. So, these two things, one, doability, and two, the answer, the right answer. By and large, this is the situation. And of course, as I said, there will always be exceptions. So, I used to be reported, I used to get this reporting from my students that there are teachers who are trying to encourage students to do these activities and engage them in interactive process, but they have little choice because a lot is there already in the book. So, what I am trying to say that how a text is written and how it determines the method of teaching. We should be able to see that relationship. If that relationship has to be different, that means that the text has to be written differently. And what that difference be, that is what I think is important to understand. Anyway, I just want to also underline that I am only going to talk about refer to class 6, class 7, class 8 books, but some of these things apply to higher level classes also. In fact, there are studies which do focus on textbooks, higher level textbooks, school textbooks only. And my understanding is when we say textbooks, we actually refer to schools only. Undergraduate level textbooks, we do say, but a textbook, it's we are talking about schools, and I am focusing on 6th, 7th and 8th for two reasons. One, my understanding is that many misconceptions about concepts of science, they get formed at this level, and this is the level where the cognitive theory of learning actually focuses on this age group. So, we have a better understanding, slightly better understanding of how students learn of this age group, and how when there is some understanding of how students learn, how concept formation takes place, what is the source of misconception. So, it is because of these two reasons. You can ask me for clarity on this. I am focusing on class 6, 7 and 8 books only, but there is another practical reason also. I am more familiar with this area. I am less familiar with class 9 and 10 books and 11 and 12 books, and there is always a major shift from class 8 to class 9 and from class 10 to class 11 in the content, and pedagogically also there is a lot of shift. So, now after having said something about the NCERT textbooks, the earlier ones and the new ones, the improved versions, which better understanding of cognitive processes reflected in the textbook and the accuracy of content. Now, the crucial question is, if quality science book, this one question should have all the answers. This is one question which all the answers which the students ask, which the potential questions which the teacher may ask in the interactive process, and again the same thing, clear all the doubts. Or science book should encourage students to think and engage them in higher cognitive level processes. Now, what is higher cognitive level processes? I know that in an earlier lecture also there was some discussion, there was some talk about it. This is something very interesting which I also have learned recently. This articulation, it is not that the concept I did not know earlier. One set of questions, there could be an interactive process where the teacher is actually seeking answers to some facts, okay, or seeking answers to let us say written definitions, definition of force. Okay, tell me definition of force, tell me formula of water. So, seeking these type of, that will still be an interactive process. Yet the nature of questions is not engaging students in process of thinking. These are certain things which students can either mug up, or students can just look at their books and answer. So there's, to that extent, there's no challenge, and also there is no effort to take students to higher level thinking process. This is something which is very important, from one level of understanding to higher level of understanding, which is now referred to as lower cognitive level to higher cognitive level. So how to frame such questions, and how to frame such questions, and how to engage students in this process of taking them to higher level of thinking, because learning is a complex process. Nobody can peep into the mind and see how concept formation is taking place, but through this interactive process, that process goes on in the minds of the students, and as they say, the error or the misconception gives you a window to peep into the minds of the students. That is the only way. That, to that extent, there is a completely different understanding of error. Error is, I think in mathematics it's much clearer. I mean, when students make mistakes, teachers who are willing to understand why students are making these mistakes, they try to look at their rough work. So it's not important to give 0 or 1 or 0 or 10. That, of course, teacher has to do, because that is what she is required to do. But at the same time, it is very important for teacher to understand, why did the student do this wrongly? Where did the student go wrong? What must have been happening in his or her mind? That a teacher can decipher only by looking at. Fortunately for, I mean, if they ask students to save their rough work, so in mathematics that, or in mathematical calculations in sciences, that rough work, if it is saved, that gives a window to understand what must have been going on in the mind of the student, and where the student is not being able to understand something. And so the teacher can come back and strengthen that part. So, so how does one write such textbooks where there is interaction, but interactive process is of a qualitatively different type, where the questions are not asked to get standard answers, or answers, factual answers, or something which is already written in the book, but helping students, challenging students, encouraging students to construct their answers. That is something which is important for the teacher, and is important for the textbook writer as well. If that space, if that scope is not there in the textbooks, two things will happen. One, well, obviously teacher will not be encouraged to take that path. Two, even if the teacher wants to take that path, there is nothing to guide the teacher in the textbook to take that path. So this is, I mean, nowadays people, I have read some of these things, and this is called inquiry method in sciences, and the thrust is on the interactive process, where there is space for students to explore. These are not close-ended questions. There is space for open-ended questions. There is space for higher order thinking, encouraging higher order, facilitating that. And in all of this, textbooks are important, so is the role of the teacher. How the teacher is using that content to make the process meaningfully interactive. I want to here I want to quote from some research. There is internationally there is a lot of work which is going on in understanding, analyzing science textbooks. To answer this question, what should be an ideal, there's no simple answer, textbook, science textbook, or what is a good quality science textbook. These researchers say that we need to look at the existing science textbooks and analyze these science textbooks to understand what more needs to be done. Okay. So they focus on three areas. One is, of course, content, and second is language, and third, and what they mean by language I'll just elaborate, and third is, of course, visuals. And there is a lot of elaboration of when they talk about visuals, they talk about content. And I'll just quote from what these researchers, how they elaborate this, because I like some of these articulation very much. Learning science and students' acquired knowledge of science concepts is the most important aspect of school science teaching. We all struggle for our students to learn more and better. We try to develop teaching strategies that can lead students to adequately, scientifically literate individuals. But research in last 30 years has shown that it is common for students to have misconceptions or other learning difficulties with different science concepts at all levels of education, from primary to university level. Students' misconceptions can have different sources: teachers' inadequate teaching, students' low attention while following the educational process, students' superficial individual learning material, students' inaccurate reading of textbooks, and most importantly, poorly prepared textbooks by the authors. This is what they underline, these researchers, that this concern which has been there for the past 70 years, if we look at the history of curriculum development, changing of curriculum, that students are not learning science. They go to higher level of education with many misconceptions. Science educators say that there are preconceptions which develop before students enter, before learners enter the formal education system. So those are there with all of us, which we acquire in the process of growing up. But once there is this opportunity for formal instruction in schools, one assumes that if there are good textbooks and if there are good teachers, good needs to be elaborated, but I'm not going to get into that. There should be, good foundation of science concepts at the beginning level, either by, lots of activities, interaction, field work, through various processes. But that is where it has been noticed by researchers that a lot of misconceptions get formed. And also, there is a lot of literature which shows that in the later stage, it's not very easy to, to remove these misconceptions. Sometimes there are studies which show that, for example, a very simple example, what students used to learn and still learn probably, that current flows like water. And there are studies which show that even undergraduate level students carry this misconception. And sometimes, both the energy transfer and this coexist. And sometimes, this earlier understanding interferes with, building this understanding, this, more accurate understanding. The various things, in atomic theory, in evolution, on each one of these concepts, there's a lot of, studies and research. And not all could be traced to, school level teaching, but many of these misconceptions actually get formed during school level, and they continue to coexist. In fact, I must tell you that, ISER Mohali, where I teach, and I teach a course on pedagogy, there's one course on curriculum in science education, and there is one course on pedagogy. And I ask students to narrate their own experience, after having this discussion. And they've written about it. In fact, I'm thinking of compiling those assignments and, making it available to other people, sharing it with other people. They actually articulate, what problems they faced when they, joined ISER, let's say. What was their earlier understanding, and how, the teaching at ISER conflicted with their understanding in certain concepts, and how they struggled. And they were very happy to know that it's a valid thing. It's not something which is wrong with each one of them or one of them as individual. There's something, some failing on their part. It is the education process, and the process in which textbooks play very important role. So, this, I don't know, maybe some of you would be able to, when we have a more elaborate discussion, when there is a possibility of taking up examples to understand this whole issue of misconception, how they get formed, what happens, what probably happened in your classroom, maybe in class 8, maybe in class 9, maybe in class 10, where you did not get an opportunity to articulate, either because there was nothing in the textbook, or because the teacher was not able to provide that opportunity. So, here, because I'm trying to focus on textbooks, this becomes something very important and challenging. The same, researchers, they write, this is the analysis of the language part. When they say, the earlier part which I read is about the content. This is about what they mean by language. The text should encourage active learning. The student reading the text in the textbooks should be at all the times encouraged to participate in active learning process, and the responses need to be paid attention to. The text should constantly offer various activities such as exercises, questions that stimulate thinking, problems to be solved, and proposals for laboratory work, observations of natural phenomena, and field and project work, and also underlines that activities should be feasible. I mean, all these things which are there in the text should be doable, otherwise no purpose is served. Activities are there for the sake of activities, which I am saying sometimes is the case with NCERT books. Text should contain activities at different cognitive levels. Textbook should contain text and stimulates students' higher order thinking skills by activity engaging them in task of higher cognitive level. The cognitive differentiation of the text is imperative. This means that some text exercises, questions, problems should be at higher cognitive level, which encourages students to be creative and creatively engage in problem solving. So, I think this is something which I thought that I would emphasize, and we need to have more elaboration when we say that cognitively higher level thinking, to develop that. What kind of questions need to be there in the textbook which fulfill this requirement? That itself is something which is a real challenge. Last thing which I want to, and then I will go to this book which I am trying to show you. So, what do we see? Thank you so much. Thank you. I really needed it, and I didn't know how to sort of, with all this paraphernalia, get up and get water. So, we have one situation where the reality of India is that majority of the students either don't do science, don't get to do science after class 8, and they don't have material sources to obtain scientific knowledge. Of course, I mean, you may say that now it's not just textbook dependent, people have access to different TV programs and TV channels. I would say still there is a lot of gender discrimination. Even if boys have access to these resources wherever, one thing one could say that it's not that the majority who have access to only textbooks have access to television programs and some of the good programs. It's not that all those people have access to, both the genders have television programs, but yes, things have changed. There is a big percentage of people who have access to television programs, and boys in general do have that access, but girls from lower middle class families don't have, I mean, they don't have the luxury when they go back from school to home, they don't have the luxury of sitting in front of television and watching what they want to watch. Even if the brother is watching some interesting channel, because they are supposed to be doing, they leave home after completing a lot of domestic work, they come back and they again have to do, it's enough that they are allowed to go to school. So to that extent, textbooks still remain one major source of learning for majority of students. So on one hand we have this situation, and on another level we say, and so the justification for having a lot of information, including about health, including about in science books about agriculture, about pollution, about large number of issues, and within one topic also including a lot of information as if there is not going to be another day. So on one level we have this, and on another level, if we talk to educationists, pedagogues, science teachers, they say that it's important to reduce the syllabus. Reduce not arbitrarily, it has to be a rational process. Deeper understanding is more important than not having any understanding or having superficial understanding. So, if a concept needs to be dealt with at a deeper level, and there is a possibility, then it's important to do that instead of doing multiple things within that topic. Actually, incidentally, a large number of science education researchers also recommend this very strongly now, that deeper level understanding, especially at the school level, especially at this level when the cognitive development process is also taking place, is most important thing. And this temptation to include a lot of information is actually counterproductive. It's not leading to, it will not lead to understanding of concepts, theories, laws, whatever. So these are the two things, and which school of thought you advocate, the books will be written accordingly. So this is the relationship between pedagogy and textbook, clearly. So if the teacher is at the center and the teacher's job is to give lecture and clarify doubts, then you can have books with a lot of information, etc., etc., and students will go to higher levels with the not very good understanding of the crux, that not only concepts, theories and laws, also the process of science, also the understanding of method of science, which is also important in science teaching, which is equally important, which is probably somebody would say is more important. And on the other side you have textbooks which encourage all of this and try to deal with misconceptions, try to understand the root, the source of misconception, so that students don't carry those misconceptions at the higher level. Nobody claims that there won't be any misconceptions, there won't be any misunderstandings. Nobody claims that, but there has to be effort to understand, to find the source of that, and deal with to the extent possible at these levels. So these are the two options, and this is the relationship between pedagogy and textbook. What I do with my students, I make them compare different types of books, and in last semester they compared NCERT and Eklavya books, and sometimes they compare the whole book. So they look at the cover page, they compare the cover page, what is there in the cover page of Eklavya book, class 8 book, what is there on the cover page of NCERT book. Whom is NCERT addressing to, book is addressing to, is the book addressing to, before beginning the formal chapters, to the teachers, to the students, and they find that it's not there actually. Whereas Eklavya books is talking to the students, they're writing something about the students, about science, about the book, about the concepts, about what the expectations is, what may be exciting, this communication directly to the students. In fact, one student said, to the students, but Eklavya books also don't talk to teachers directly, which is important. So some students, they start like this, and then they look at the content page, then they, then they decide to, compare their chosen chapter, common chapter from NCERT book and from Eklavya book. Some students, they just compare chapter as deeply as possible. So, yesterday only I was rereading actually. This assignment has already been marked, and last semester. And suddenly, yesterday I thought that maybe, I should read this randomly. There were 15 students who took this course, and each one of them compared different chapters. So, there is this chapter, first the Eclave book. This is this, yeah, but just go ahead, that further down, next, yeah, stop it there. So, the student gives a title and he says, introducing astronomy to middle school children. That is the objective of both the chapters. So, this is one. Here, there is this famous experiment, I say, in Hoshangabad Science Teaching Programme, and most of the time Kamal's favorite experiment, I would say, where the shadow of 1 meter long rod is measured throughout the day, then on different days, and if there is a very motivated teacher or student, then over a month, and then there is a very ambitious thing which is written in the book. If you are willing and if you have space, then do these observations for the whole year, followed by questions, not about the whole year, but about on 1 day observations, length of the shadow, on 1 week's observation, and has the shadow shifted or it's on the same, and also asking questions that that 12 o'clock it's the heat is maximum or the shadow is that true, So, during the discussion you ask all these questions and then you look at your data and try to understand. Maybe Kamal will share his experience how this used to go, when he used to do this with teachers, and if actually teachers encourage students to do this experiment in schools. But the interesting thing is that the experiment itself, in a way conveys that that the whole how painstaking this process is when we talk about observing, when we are talking about astronomy. This is just one small example of that. And let us see to what extent you are willing to go. 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. And if somebody could do it for 1 month also, fascinating things which come up. So, this student says, first thing, one looks at the title of the chapter, the NCERT, which I am going to show you in a minute, textbook is Stars and Solar System, while the Eclave textbook says looking at the sky. The chapter or NCERT textbook suggests that it is going to contain information about the respective topic, about this topic, while the Eclave one presents it as an activity that can be done and it could be taken as an open-ended thing. So, the focus is on activity, and here in NCERT the focus is on information. And then he goes on and says that NCERT chapter is a 24-page long chapter and contains 28 topics, while Eclave chapter is only, it's a short chapter, 12-page chapter only has 6 topics, and one can clearly see that NCERT textbook is focusing more on quantity over quality of the content. This is a student writing. And then the student, can you just show that NCERT thing also? So, I am not showing the whole, actually it's very interesting when you sit with both the books and try to compare. There are some common activities also. So, this is the chapter, look at the title and just go further. Stars in the solar system. Okay, let it be. So maybe we can later on see some more things, but I want to just focus on this. No, let it be. I just wanted to show the title and then maybe. NCERT textbook, and the student is able to look at all of this. This is not an expert or science education researcher who is writing this. NCERT textbook takes the general approach and includes all the information that they think a child must have about the celestial objects and mainly about the solar system before she passes the school. None of the topics are discussed in detail, and the book just skims through all the topics by giving away facts and basic information but about every topic. Many of the difficult concepts like heliocentrism are assumed to be obvious to the child and therefore not discussed, not even, it's just in passing. Furthermore, these concepts are used to build on other concepts and information about the motion of celestial objects, which is not done. Unnecessary mention of abstract and high cognitive concepts like gravitation and the fact that stars produce their own light is there, that makes understanding of many of these things more difficult and troublesome. So, this is a precise thing which the person says. Eclave textbooks take a different approach and only include topics in which hands-on activities can be performed. Astronomy is a subject that is primarily based on observation, and Eclave's textbook does a really good job in sticking to the subject's essence. For example, they discuss the movement of stars and constellation, but they haven't discussed what is a star. Okay, so I will not read the whole thing, but what I am trying to say that this process can be, once we discuss this, can be seen by these students who actually studied NCERT textbooks. And it says that all of this has a lot to do with the textbooks. The next title which he uses is what kind of teaching practices does textbook promote, and clearly says that the NCERT textbook has no choice but to promote lecture method, and whereas Eclave textbook you can't proceed unless the activity is done and the teacher engages the students with the questions which are followed by the activity. But then the student also says, and this has been a concern which many of the students have expressed about Eclave books, it is not a self-reading textbook. Meaning if you don't have, if your teacher is not encouraging you to do these activities, if the teacher is not doing what he or she is expected to do for this book, not performing that role of it's called scaffolding. I mean, I know that you've heard about Vygotskian thing, what Vygotsky talks about, support from a knowledgeable adult teacher. If that is not there, then what will students do? So, Eclave textbooks, it's either or all or nothing. So, that is the criticism. So, if experiments do not happen in schools, nothing will, students will not learn anything. So, this is the fear which he expresses. Just two more things, let me just finish. And then of course, very this also criticism which we have been hearing since 1972 when the program was started, that only certain types of certain concepts can be taught from 6 to 8 level, concepts for which experiments could be designed which are doable at the school level. So, this is another thing. These are the two things, concerns which this person, the student has articulated, and under the title, well, not all is well even with a clever book. So, he is basically trying to say that an ideal science textbook is a very contested, debatable thing. It is not that we cannot arrive at consensus at some point of time, for some period of time, that is possible, but it is something which is not very easy. He has not written about the illustrations. Many other students have talked about illustrations, that a clever book have single color, illustrations, and the photographs are not produced properly because this is textbook corporation paper and things like that. So, production of photographs is of very poor quality, whereas in NCERT textbooks these are multicolor illustrations, etc., etc. So, they thought that they should write something positive about NCERT textbooks, and I think genuinely felt that illustrations are more attractive when we are talking about students. Anyway, I will stop here and I will wait for your questions. I think I have spoken enough.
I don't know if you need a mic, but if you need one, I will pass it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I can go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So there's just one thing that's not quite clear. So you spoke about how even after the NCERT textbooks got better, people who are going to the field were saying that very little has changed in terms of pedagogy, and how the entire approach is better. So what is the evidence that, like, the central question you are tackling is how do we write a textbook that will change pedagogy? But you're also saying that the changes that have been seen as of today in textbooks have not led to a change in pedagogy. So is there any evidence to indicate that the average teacher in Indian school is going to respond to a change in textbook at all? Especially given that up till 8th grade, at least in CBSE schools where I studied, the exams are set by the teacher. So even if you send a new textbook, she can continue using last year's textbook and set the exam based on that, right? There's no pressure for her to move and change. So what is the evidence that textbooks force changes in pedagogy? Do we have any data to support that?
Actually, I think this is, I thought I would say something about it in the beginning, but I forgot, but it's good that you asked this question. See, it's very clear that textbooks alone cannot change everything. I mean, they may give some support to motivated teachers, but you're right, the teacher has to face this reality of exams. Okay, so the teacher, some enterprising, some very motivated, some teacher who has the luxury of time, etc., etc., may say that despite that, I will prepare, or have the teacher has the confidence that if I follow this method, which is the method for science teaching, my students will be able to do well even in traditional exam. But such teachers are rare. So one thing I think is important, which we all have understood, that just by changing the textbook, we can't change everything. And so there is always a possibility of reverting back, to the traditional method of teaching, even with the best textbooks available. That is always there. So there's no evidence, to say, unless the process of transformation of science teaching includes everything, includes motivating teachers, includes they going through the training process, how do they, how they are supposed to teach the students, and also the examination system, which is very important.
So do we have any, like, has anyone ever attempted to collect data on this question? Let's say you go to one district and you change the textbook, in another district you change textbooks as well as give teacher trainings, somewhere else you do all three and see what happens. Because you have no government pressures on what you can and cannot do.
See, Eklavya and Kishore Bharti before that has done all of this, including changing the exam. I don't know how much you know about it. We keep we keep talking about Eklavya and Kishore Bharti as if everybody knows about it. So, but this group, which started working way back in 1972, changing the textbook. This group actually did everything. Changed the textbook, teacher training method, and ensured that teachers are able to follow what they learn in the teacher training in the schools. So, provision of experiment material kit was also an equally important part of it. You can't expect teachers to go back to their schools where they don't even have access to enough chalk and good blackboards to do all these experiments. That, and also negotiating with government to change the examination system. So, the whole package. So, there is this work has been done, now it's stopped, first for 10-12 years by this organization called Kishore Bharti, and later on it was taken over by Eklavya, and Eklavya continued it for another 20 years, this whole package, including exams. So, there is this evidence that teachers in this program did change the pedagogy of teaching at the school level. But not this kind of thing that in one district only textbooks were changed, in another district only textbooks plus teacher training, in the third district 3 variables were changed including exams. This kind of studies are there.
I have just one point. And so the textbooks and teachers both were extremely important in my life because I did not have an access to the variety of reference books. Further loud? Yeah, so both are important for what I have seen through. So one of the issues I feel, and more after listening to you, is that all our schools, most of them, they are restricted by the time periods. In 45 minutes, you have to finish this topic. Here also, and ISER also is same thing. Our classes are. Now sitting in this classroom of 200 students, if I have to finish topic, there is no way I can satisfy each and every student who has the question then and there. Right? The same thing if I am given for the 2 hours, it will be a different matter, right? So we are from the very beginning, from the school time itself, we are leaving these students with the unsatisfied answers which they cannot find. So I think it's more than the books, isn't it that, okay, that part also has to be addressed in some way? Because we are limited by time, the number of students are large, teachers are less. And then we are limited by this strict timetable. So do you have any comments on this aspect of it?
I mean, what can I say? I completely agree with you. When somebody asks, it's like, have you heard of multi-grade teaching in schools? One teacher teaching for 5 classes.
Yeah, everything.
Okay. So the strategies were developed how multi-grade teaching should be done. Okay. So some of us responded by saying that why do we have one single teacher school? That's wrong to begin with. So the fight should be for having 5 teachers for 5 classes. Okay, demand, struggle, fight, or request, or whatever, however you may like to put it. So I would say the same thing here. Why should there be, when we are talking about at least school level, why should ISER level also, my students tell me that sometimes in their class there are 145 students. So when we say you speak up, you ask your question. So in the beginning these students used to say that, but we are not used to it. We've never asked any question because, we have attended classes where there are 145 students. So we just go, sit, listen and come back. And my question would be, why should ISER, a premier institution in science education, have such huge classes? Of course, there is time constraint also. For example, I'll say, one answer would be like when we were doing, this science teaching program, we insisted, and it was implemented, that instead of having one period, one science period for the whole week, there should be science classes on 3 days, 2 continuous periods. And this was a struggle, let me tell you, it wasn't that simple. There was so much reluctance to this, but we had to, go into these details. If the experiments have to be performed, which means that the teacher has to, bring all the material to the classroom along with the students. Maybe, he would appoint 1 or 2 students who would go to the kit room, collect the material, distribute the material. By this time 20 minutes gone. So when would you do? So it's very important. So we insisted on, bringing about these changes, and these schools did change their timetable with a lot of reluctance and things like that. So what I am saying, my point is that these constraints, if we have faith, or if our understanding is this is the process of teaching of science, this is the pedagogy which needs to be followed if we are talking about building better understanding of science, scientific concepts. All these other constraints have to go, and we need to sort of fight for that.
So was it tried anywhere in any of these efforts, that removing these constraints of the periods and give them a big chunk of?
Yes, yes, yes,
And
yes.
What was the response of the students and feedback? Or
No, it was done in all the schools where this program was implemented. In all the schools, to begin with, it was in pilot level in 16 government, these are all government schools.
so did it continue later, or it was just
That's another story. After 30 years, the program was, after 30 years,
okay?
it went on for almost 30 years.
So it went on for 30 years.
Yes.
And why it was then dropped, or it just?
That's a long story. 30 years, and let me also tell you the number. Beginning with 16 schools in the pilot phase, going up to almost, I think, I don't remember, 300 plus schools in the whole district, and then going to 13 districts in Madhya Pradesh. And this went on for 30 years, this program.
There are a couple of comments and a question on the live stream. I'll just read out the comments and then read the questions. So one is, the first comment is that as compared to NCERT, textbooks by the SCRT are now almost at, at par, at the same level, which was not earlier the case. Okay, this is just a comment. And the other comment is that the open-endedness of activities is crucial for original and personal learning to take place. The other comment is that sometimes we see that secondary school textbooks contain heavy words and they don't give any explanation and leave them unexplained just for further understanding in higher classes.
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
now comes the question. How about sometimes teaching without any textbook? Would this be more dependent on teacher education than teaching with a textbook? Or will it encourage teachers' creativity?
Well, I agree with all the comments, I must say. Yes, that's actually, I thought, when I wrote my first draft, how I would proceed with this, I did write this question, why textbooks? Okay. I don't know whether it would be better or worse, but there could be, one answer is that when we were working, and I would still stick with that philosophy, the philosophy was that our job is not to create islands of excellence, meaning having one wonderful school where teachers have no constraints and they are encouraged to create their own textbook, follow their own method and have resources and have support and things like that. Excellent school with lots of possibilities and ideas. People have done this kind of work. The question is, how do you take it beyond one school, beyond 100 students, beyond 600 students? So we always, as a group, understanding, and which continued, in Kishore Bharati, we started with this understanding. I must say that the leader who started this work, Anil Sadgopal, had clarity on this. We want to work in the existing system, and that is the reason we, with a lot of struggle, entered the government school system. So when you work in government school system, there are certain things which are given. So the textbook, the teacher training, system, examination, all of that is given, and also in a way curriculum was also given. So we were not allowed to deviate completely from that. We approach change, approach to topics change, like parts of flowers. So NCERT books used to, it's like here is a diagram, and then you have parts of flowers, and student mugging up those diagrams and parts of flowers, and we change it completely. You go out, get the flowers, sit down and dissect the flowers, and then let's see, draw what you've got. But the topic remained the same. So we didn't even have freedom to change the curriculum completely. So within those constraints, but we worked with those constraints because the objective was to, work to change the, things in government school system.
Sadhna, I have a question. So when there's a general, I don't know whether to call it a belief or a sense or whatever, that the way science has progressed in history is in some sense reflected in the way, or it is somewhat parallel to the way students understand concepts. When the development might have parallels, right, of that where a very young child compared to an older child has gone through a process which might parallel the development of a concept in history. Okay. So then we are faced with this challenge of putting whatever 300, 400 years of history into a 10 years of school learning, right? And this is certainly not going to fit. Now, if we want the method to be at the center stage and not just the information, then the only way is to pare down the content to such a small amount that it can fit into 10 years via the same process. Is that a pragmatic way of doing this, in the hope that if you have learnt one concept following the entire rigor of the process, you would be able to apply it to some other process and learn things on your own at a later stage, as and when the need arises. So is this something that people consider when they write books? I mean, need not be textbooks, but books at all.
See, I think as far as Kamal can talk about Eklavya, but whatever I remember of Kishore Bharati, this, making learner self-dependent is one of the serious objectives of any school program. Up to class 12, I'm not saying that by the time you finish your middle school you will be an independent learner. I'm not saying that. But the process should start very early, because nobody can have access to all the knowledge.
Sure.
Whatever. So it's very important from the beginning to build this understanding that a lot of learning has to be done, and so whatever is taught is understood.
Right. So
That
is
is very
there,
important.
is it possible to think of a small set of such things from which to pick? 4 concepts,
sure
5
if-
concepts, 10
Yeah,
10
I'm
concepts.
sure if people sit down and look at various books and the kind of things which have already been done with feedback, what has been the problem areas, troubling areas, what have been the interesting areas where I'm sure it is a possibility. It is possible to do that, but the issue is not this here. I think all this is possible. People put their brains together, My worry is, and I think that's the reality, that it will not be acceptable to the policymakers, to the parents, because immediately these issues, come up. Now, this book, it's so thin, it has only 10 concepts, it doesn't talk about it. We faced all these things, in Hoshangabad Science Teaching Programme since Kishore Bharati days. This curriculum is lower level curriculum because it does not teach chemical symbols to students up to class 8. It is teaching students to make their own physical balance with the material which they can obtain from wherever. Okay. So in this 20th, 21st century, this is what you are doing to students, our students. When and now of course things have progressed much more, in this era of computer and stimulating learning, etc., when students can learn everything, the whole understanding of what is learning is so problematic. So it will not be acceptable. That is where the real battle lies. This is what my thinking is.
Sadhna, yeah. I was wondering that to answer this question, what is a good textbook, or to evolve to a better one of the things that might be helpful is to get feedback from the students and the teachers who are actually engaging deeply with that book. Now my question is that is this an experience of other, I guess in India it's not done at all, or is it? And is it done in other countries?
Well, feedback from students and teachers, systematic feedback.
Yeah, in a structured,
in a
like
very
you
structured
give a
way,
questionnaire
organized
asking
way.
about this chapter and this chapter and
Yeah,
somehow and try
yeah.
to.
Yeah. Maybe Homi Baba Science Center is doing something, but otherwise I am not aware of this. And in fact, when I started doing this with my ISER Mohali students, I realized that I couldn't give them something to read on Indian. Whenever I give them something to read, they say, but this is in, the context of, this work has been done in the context of developed world. Give us something to read which has been done in India. So it's very difficult to find these kinds of things in Indian situation. So I don't think that there is this kind of systematic study getting feedback from students and from teachers.
In other countries also.
In other countries I can't say, I'm sure, because so much work is being done in science education in other countries. I'm sure there must be.
Hi, good evening, ma'am. I really enjoyed your talk. There's just a thought I had about this. So I studied a CBSE syllabus following an NCRT textbook, and I grew up actually till like 8th standard. I was studying an IGCSE syllabus, which is a British syllabus, and then moved to India, where I had the NCRT one. So I could very clearly see a difference in the way the books are written and the way it's taught as well in these school levels. So one thing which was the most stark contrast was that in NCRT books and the teaching method, I felt it wasn't application oriented at all. Like you said, there is a lot of information, and I think we can't talk about this without talking about how students are evaluated, because they go hand in hand. The way the students and teachers read the book depends very much on their evaluation. So the way the schooling went in the IGCSE syllabus was, for example, there wasn't much about let's say how formulas are derived. Okay, and they might have mentioned it in passing in the class just to tell the students that this is how we got this formula. But then there was no other mention of it. We weren't graded on whether we could mug up a derivation, for example. Whereas in the Indian syllabus, this was the main thing. So, for example, I studied physics till 12th, and I can very confidently say I just found how to hack the system. Like my basics are very unclear in physics, and till now I remain very intimidated by it. But I managed to get by with a 96%. That's just because I found a way to hack the system, and the evaluation was very much like, most of the questions were derive this, derive this, derive this. So I just figured out a way to mug up those and vomit it on the paper. And because the textbook itself did not have much of an application-oriented information, I couldn't understand things like, there were basic concepts, I couldn't understand why am I learning this. And if I asked the teachers, for example, I just didn't get an answer. It was just, you learn what's in the textbook first, then we'll talk about other stuff. So those remain very alien concepts to me. Like for example, when we studied simple harmonic motion, I was so confused, like, okay, this happens in a pendulum, but where else does it happen? Why are we studying this? It seems like a very ideal situation. Why am I studying this if this doesn't happen in daily life? I didn't understand applications. Instead, the textbooks and the evaluation was derivation oriented. So is there a way we can maybe decrease that? And is that already happening? I understand that, so I have discussed this with a few people, and everyone remains stuck to this opinion that derivations are absolutely required. And to an extent, I understand that that is how students learn how research in that field works. This is how you combine concepts and arrive at something new. But I feel like a lot of weightage is being given to it. So is there some way we can reconcile this?
Change that. I don't know. Really. I mean, should be done, that I can say, and the question is why we have not been able to do that.
Also,
But,
in other fields also, like when they talked about, for example, in 9th, I think we had a chapter on plant morphology, different types of flowers, hypogynous, hypergynous, all of these things. And there was never any discussion or mention in the book about why are there so many types? Like, what is the evolutionary aspect of this? Why do we see so many types in nature? Can you, as students, think about it? Something like that. Because it wasn't in the textbook, it didn't come up in the classes either. So it just became mugging up different types.
Absolutely. But interestingly, there are people internationally, in different countries, who are developing, these alternative chapters, and which deal with the issues which you are, asking. And Bhas was also saying, it's not the history, it's the history of concept. And there is evidence to show that that really helps in learning concepts. How, historically how the concepts have evolved, what were the questions, what were the queries. So this kind of work is going on internationally and also being tried at smaller level, but I'm not aware of, in Indian situation, whatever was happening has also been shut down. That is the Eklavya thing, and that was the time when Eklavya was, developing chapters for class 9, 10. They've already developed some very interesting chapters for these classes, but they're just going around with their chapters nowhere to implement.
So why not 2 textbooks, one for teachers, one for students?
Why not have two
Textbooks.
Why do you say this? I will respond to this, but I would like to.
Because that would take care at least of some of the aspects of how an activity is to be conducted if it is prescribed in the textbook, like a guideline for teachers maybe.
Guideline.
And so right now there are a lot of teacher trainings etc. happening, but again the reach is quite small. So if we prescribe 2 textbooks, one for students, one for teachers, would the reach be a bit better?
See, I'll tell you, actually maybe sometime there has to be a full-fledged talk about Hoshangabad Science Teaching Programme, because so much was done in that, so much. So yes, teachers' guides for each chapter were written in Hoshangabad Science Teaching Programme when the program was with Kishore Bharti, and some of those teachers' guides for some of the chapters, they were finalized. In fact, I was trying to ask Eklavya people if they have those teachers' guides. For two purposes. One, of course, guiding teachers how to, handle their classroom situations. And also, the understanding is very clear that teacher needs high level knowledge also and is capable of, as an adult, as a graduate in science or mathematics. So, and at that time there were teachers who were not, who did not have a graduate degree beyond, and they did not study beyond class 12 or maybe class 11. So, they also needed this kind of academic support. But I am just trying to remember what happened. One problem was that nobody was willing to read. Teachers were not willing to read. I mean, it was expecting a bit too much of them, that they will go back and they will, engage deeply by reading. As it is, what they were doing was enough.
So there are many questions, hands up suddenly now.
My question was that like in school curriculum, like there are definitions from the beginning itself. And I personally think that these definitions turn out to be a restriction to the students' learning. Like it is like a fact that you just need to mark up, like people don't question the definition. So like I personally feel that these things like definitions should be just stated as like a statement, but they should not be like defined like until 11th and 12th curriculum. Like I understand that in undergraduate curriculum like definitions have to be there, but in school curriculum I guess that the word definition should be removed. Words like theorem, axioms, corollaries should be removed, like because they just make things very rigid and like students lose the connect.
I agree with you. In fact, there is something called constructing your own definition based on, your observation, your experience. So, in the sense that what you are able to make out, that, and this giving definition actually leads to mugging up. There's no doubt about it, and I completely agree with you.
Good evening, ma'am. It was really wonderful to be a part of this talk. So I had actually two questions, but to what he said, I feel that we should change the definition of a definition, because I feel that there is some necessity to define a thing. So we need to define the concept of what a blackboard is, even if it is green. But we need to change the definition. That definition is the last thing of a definition. So I think we need to change the idea that the concept is limited to a definition. So I think that's what
I think what you're saying is also, I mean, I would agree with. The problem is, I think what he is trying to point out, by giving definition, and sometimes definitions are written in bold letters.
Correct.
So the kind of importance is given to those precise one or two sentences shifts the focus.
Correct.
Which is problematic.
Correct. So ma'am, I wanted to ask, this is more in relation to class 11th and 12th. So the kind of focus, as you said, the importance of textbook and the limitation of resources outside textbook for a certain class of students. So ma'am, don't you feel that it is wrong to include things outside textbook in entrance exams, which is what happens normally?
In entrance exams?
Correct.
Which entrance exams? Your
JEE, NEET, especially advanced. I don't think it is possible to crack advanced only with the textbook. So don't you think that is wrong?
If you ask me, I would say that having JEE itself is very problematic. And now we have these, all India level university entrance exams. At least earlier, I mean, a person like me could enter Delhi University on the basis of my class 11 result. There was no problem. PCM was checked and and now, so on one hand we have all these entrance exams, and of course, out of course, which is giving rise to all these coaching classes, and it's a parallel economy which is going on. People are not estimating the amount of, you know, money which goes into this, it's almost like a parallel education system. So on one level we have this which is not accessible to students. So if you don't attend coaching classes, you can't appear for JEE because it's not restricted to the school course. You're right. Why have JEE at all? But the problem actually started with Delhi University, where the cutoff went from 99.9% to 100%. So government has found this way out, which is also very problematic.
Thank you, ma'am. Also, in context to the class 9, 8, 9, 10 books, I find it very, very weird that the chapter something like periodic classification of elements, which is central to chemistry, appears almost in the 4th chapter, whereas the students are already exposed to things like chemical reactions in the very first, second, and third chapter. I think the first chapter is different types of chemical reaction, second chapter is acids and bases, third chapter is metals and non-metals, which has the major chunk of reactions. Then comes carbon, then comes periodic table. So why not make periodic table somewhere in class 8 or 9? Because already reactions, symbols and elements are introduced in 8 and 9. So,
in fact, the first question should be, why is, I mean, in the first place, why is it the 4th chapter? Who were the people who, you know, experts who put it in the in that order? See, this is also something very important, you know, in textbooks, it's not just selection of topics, concepts. Equally important is the order, you know, in which these need to be done. And I don't know why such an irrational thing is being done.
Also, I think the same goes with calculus. Like class 12th calculus textbook has a huge section on calculus, whereas physics in class 11 uses all of calculus for center of mass, center of. So yeah, that's. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So, some first and second standard books have mentioned that sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So, instead of mentioning about the rotation of the earth, so is it an example of bad textbook, or is it because such small kids cannot comprehend the concept of rotation of the earth?
Could you repeat in which class this rotation of earth is introduced?
I guess.
Please repeat your question somehow. I think I missed some part of it.
Yeah, I asked that some first and second standard books have mentioned about the rising of sun in the east and setting of sun in the west, instead of the rotation of the earth. So, is it an example of bad textbook, or is it mentioned because such small kids cannot comprehend the concept of rotation of the earth?
See, it depends what is done later on. I think in class 1 and 2, it's their direct observation. So, in fact, you know, the problem is that when you start telling them, the teacher, I mean, it's a very interesting thing which, you know, we always talk about. When the students are told that earth is also revolving and earth is spherical and things like that, so students, when they are asked in the exam or whenever, so they write that earth is stationary, this is our experience, earth is flat, this is our experience, but our teacher says that it rotates, and our teacher says that it's spherical. So if that is allowed, I think it's fine.
Yes, ma'am, sure. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm a student who studied All right, I'm a student who has studied IGCSE till the 10th standard, and before that, before 9th, I didn't even know what a board was because our school did not do boards. I studied in an alternate school, and when I came to 10th, I was told of something called a syllabus in IGCSE, where we have a predefined everything that our examination expects of us is defined, and our textbook is just built around this. What I realized this did to us as students, it gave us a guide for how to read the textbook. After we read a syllabus which expects us things like to be able to define exactly this word, to be able to apply exactly this situation, this concept in what kinds of situations, it gave us a window, essentially a window into how the author of the textbook probably wanted to say what was said in this paragraph. And when I came to CBSE, I found the entire concept of a syllabus, a predefined syllabus, missing. What is in the textbook, what is remotely touched in the textbook can appear for an exam. It is just based on teachers' experience, past papers' experience of what the most likely questions are. My question is this: how effective do you think are these kind of syllabi for a textbook and an examination point of view? And why is it that NCERT and CBSE don't have this?
See, NCERT, actually the order is like this. It's the curriculum. NCERT also, spends a lot of time and money in designing curriculum, and then based on curriculum, at least this is what is said, they make syllabus, and from syllabus, the textbooks are made.
I totally believe they do. I totally believe they do. It's that
is the thing,
My question is on why is this not made available to? Why is this not made public?
To the students.
To the students, which in my experience actually helped tremendously. It made reading the textbook much easier. It made reading the textbook very fun, actually.
What to say? I think we should have a interactive session with NCERT director if possible.
So
or
I'll just
former director, maybe. Former director would be willing to interact with you and answer some of these very.
So I'll just make one comment, Sadhna. I don't know if you have seen the recent Maharashtra State Board books.
No, I haven't.
In some very cursory fashion, they do say at the beginning of the textbook that this is, or at the beginning of every unit in the textbook, that this is what is expected out of this section or this unit. It's not very elaborate, or it's not very precise, but something is there. Maybe you should have a look at that.
I think you're raising a very relevant question, because what is to be taught in the class and what is to be examined, etc. This has been a question which all organizers of the school system have been concerned about, and terms like curriculum framework, curriculum, syllabus, etc. have emerged out of that discourse, and there has been attempt to define or at least explain what these three different levels of deciding or suggesting to the teacher what they need to do in the classroom, or to the examiners what they need to aim for to examine in their examinations, that these three levels of statement should be able to clarify. I think the NCF 2005, National Curriculum Framework 2005, was an exercise to deal with a lot of these confusions, and also in a sense state why these three levels of deciding or recommending what needs to be done in the classroom, what needs to be done in the examination or evaluation, etc., that should be as clearly put forward as possible. I'll only say that all these documents are in public. On the NCERT website you can find them. There's so many other websites which repeat all that. But to be able to wade through all that and see how complex this debate has been, and it's nowhere near getting resolved, that we are still having a lot of confusion, confounded in this area. But I think for all teachers, for all students, these are issues that they have to deal with.
She permits for the students. I mean, just note down how many times you ask your professors about slides please or notes please. Versus books please.
Okay, so can we?
Just one last thing. This you can say I'm trying to advertise this it's a Mohali program, but in that course, this is called a minor. We have 2 courses, one on curriculum, one on pedagogy, and in these courses we actually deal with, all these issues which Kamal was trying to point out. What is curriculum, what has been the history, what have been the debates around it, how is curriculum different from, and all of this is in the context of science education and syllabus and then books. What is the relationship, if there's any, if actually the process happens like this, or finally the authors who write the textbooks, they just cursorily look at syllabus and write what they want to. So these are the issues and the type of questions which you have raised, we deal with in more detail in this course. Yes.
Really the last question.
Okay. I just want to share one thing which I faced in my school years. So I faced a lack of link between the chapters. Like I was reading something in one chapter and the next one has something else. Like there is a clear lack of link between the subjects, not in the subjects, the chapters actually. So how can we actually deal with the lack of the link between these things actually?
This is, you're talking about class 9 or anyway.
Actually after 5, like I faced in my school year, so after 5, 6 something.
So
like
every topic is like an independent,
not in the topic actually, like I was reading something in one chapter, the next chapter is kind of related, but you cannot like apply the one thing of the first chapter in a general way so that you can understand the other chapters, the aspects.
See, this is also something which is important, which I know that it does not get reflected in textbooks, but linkages, inter-class linkages, like you do something in class, let's say 6, and then continue with that at a higher level in class 7 and then class 8, and then maybe class 9 onwards. So this is one, within these 3 or 4 different classes, you deal with certain areas of the discipline. And the other is that what is the kind of coherence, what is the kind of linkages which are there in different chapters within a class. Why do we do this topic and why don't we do something else? Are they thought about independently? What is the thinking process? How are they? These are all very complex debates, and a lot of times many of these things happen in a very ad hoc manner. And and there is historical baggage also. No, this was there 10 years ago. This has to, how can you remove this? So it's that also, that kind of very logical, very rational things. So overall revision of what should be done in class 10, let's say, that requires much more deeper kind of engagement.
Yeah, I'm sure there are many more questions that are popping up in your minds at the moment, but we'll really have to cut this. But you're welcome to come and talk to Kamal and Sadhana tomorrow. They're here. And please do attend tomorrow's lecture too, because, well, I'm marketing. He's already marketed your lecture. I don't need to do anything more. And I hope to see all of you and more tomorrow. Okay. So thanks, Sadhna, for a.
Thank
You broke your own promise, which is good. You broke your own promise.
Oh.
But that's nice. Okay, so thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
I mean,
very
I really like interacting with students and all of you. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah.